Did you know using your browser in incognito mode doesn't actually protect your privacy? Take back your privacy with IPVanish VPN. Just one tap and all your data, passwords, communications, browsing history, and more will be instantly protected. IPVanish makes you virtually invisible online. Use IPVanish on all your devices, anytime you go online at home and especially on public Wi-Fi. Get IPVanish now for 70% off a yearly plan with this exclusive offer at ipvanish.com/audio. Did you know using your browser in incognito mode doesn't actually protect your privacy? Take back your privacy with IPVanish VPN. Just one tap and all your data, passwords, communications, browsing history, and more will be instantly protected. IPVanish makes you virtually invisible online. Use IPVanish on all your devices, anytime you go online at home and especially on public Wi-Fi. Get IPVanish now for 70% off a yearly plan with this exclusive offer at ipvanish.com/audio.
What if I told you that before L. Ron Hubbard created Scientology, he was living with rocket scientists and practicing actual magic rituals designed to summon ancient gods? What if I told you that everything about Scientology makes perfect sense once you understand its real origins in the occult underground of 1940s California? Today, we're uncovering the bizarre true story that connects pulp science fiction, ceremonial magic, and one of the most controversial religions in the world. So there's this guy in 1930s America. His name is Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, grinding out stories for pulp magazines at a penny per word. He's writing everything from westerns to science fiction, churning out millions of words to keep the lights on. Ron could spin tales faster than most people could read them, and he had this thing about making everything sound way more dramatic than it actually was. Even back then, friends noticed he had this habit of telling wild stories about his adventures that were obviously complete fiction. He'd claim he'd been to Asia, fought in wars, studied with mysterious teachers. This guy was already living in his own alternate reality, which makes sense when you realize he was making a living creating alternate realities for magazine readers. He did this brief stint at George Washington University, studying civil engineering before dropping out. Who needs facts when you have imagination, right? This is important because it shows the foundation of everything that came later. Here's a man who discovered early on that creating compelling stories was way more profitable and interesting than dealing with actual reality. The pulp fiction world was perfect training for what came next. These magazines needed constant content, so writers learned to hook readers fast, keep them turning pages, and always promise something bigger and more exciting was coming. Sound familiar? These storytelling skills would become the bedrock for something much bigger, much stranger, and infinitely more profitable than any pulp magazine could offer. What's fascinating is how his writing background shaped everything about Scientology. The whole structure reads like science fiction. Ancient alien civilizations, galactic federations, epic battles between good and evil spanning millions of years. He was essentially writing the most elaborate piece of science fiction ever created, except he convinced people it was real. This is where the story gets genuinely wild. In the 1940s, Hubbard hooks up with Jack Parsons, a brilliant rocket scientist who also happened to be a devoted follower of Aleister Crowley. If you're unsure who that is, go back and listen to an episode of this podcast where I discuss Aleister Crowley. He had this magical system called Thelemic. Parsons was simultaneously developing rocket fuel for the U.S. military while practicing ceremonial magic on the weekends. The compartmentalization was impressive. Hubbard moves into Parsons' mansion in Pasadena, which was basically ground zero for American occultism at the time. The house was full of scientists, artists, and occultists, all experimenting with consciousness, sexuality, and what they believed were genuine magical practices. It was like a combination research lab and spiritual commune. Here's where we need to understand what Crowley actually taught, because it explains everything about Scientology. Thelemic was built around the idea that humans could achieve godlike statuses through specific practices. Crowley believed individual will was supreme, that traditional morality was basically programming designed to keep people weak, and that enlightened individuals operated by completely different rules than ordinary people. The core Thelemic principle was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." This sounds like hedonistic, anything-goes philosophy, but Crowley meant something much more specific. He taught that each person had a true will, their authentic spiritual purpose, and that discovering and following this true will was the path to divinity. Hubbard and Parsons conducted what they called the Babylon Working, elaborate magical rituals intended to summon a divine feminine force to Earth that would herald a new age of human consciousness. They believed they could literally change the course of human evolution through ceremonial magic combined with sexual practices. The whole thing ended predictably when Hubbard ran off with Parsons' girlfriend, Sarah, and a significant chunk of his money. Parsons eventually realized he'd been conned, but the damage was done. Hubbard had absorbed years of Crowley's teachings about human potential, the power of ritual and repetition, and the idea that special individuals could transcend normal human limitations. These concepts became the foundation of everything he built later. The seeds of Scientology were planted right there in that Pasadena mansion, in those ritual chambers where Hubbard learned that people would pay serious money and dedicate their lives to achieving promised states of superhuman consciousness. Here's where Hubbard's background in both fiction writing and occult practices crashes into post-war America's obsession with psychology and self-improvement. In 1950, he publishes Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. And suddenly, everyone's talking about engrams and having a clear state of consciousness. If you closely look at Dianetics, Crowley's fingerprints are all over it. The fundamental idea that humans are operating way below their potential, that's pure Thelema. The belief that through specific techniques, people can achieve superhuman abilities like perfect memory and enhanced intelligence, Crowley had been teaching that for decades. The notion that most people are essentially sleepwalking through life, controlled by unconscious programming, Crowley called it being enslaved by social conditioning. Hubbard was absolutely brilliant at taking Crowley's complex ceremonial magic and repackaging it as scientific psychology. Where Crowley talked about achieving knowledge in conversation with the holy guardian angel, Hubbard promised the state of clear. Where Crowley used elaborate rituals and meditation to break down mental barriers, Hubbard created auditing with its repetitive questioning techniques designed to uncover buried traumas. The genius move was wrapping everything in the language of science and technology. Post-war Americans were ready to believe that science could solve anything, including the mysteries of human consciousness. Hubbard gave them electropsychometers instead of magic circles, auditing sessions instead of magical invocations. But the underlying promise remained exactly the same. You can transcend ordinary human limitations and become something greater. The book became a bestseller almost immediately. Here was this former pulp writer claiming he'd discovered the fundamental laws of governing the human mind, and people ate it up. Maybe because at its core, he was selling the same thing humans have always wanted, the promise that they could be more powerful, more intelligent, more capable than they currently were. What made Dianetics work was Hubbard's understanding of human psychology gained from both his fiction writing and his years studying Crowley's techniques. He knew how to create compelling narratives that people wanted to believe in, and he understood the psychological power of repetitive practices combined with the promise of transformation. By the early 1950s, Hubbard faced a serious business problem. Dianetics was popular, but other people were starting to practice it independently without paying him licensing fees. His solution was typically audacious. He'd create an entire religion around his ideas, which would give him both legal protection and a more comprehensive control structure. In 1952, Scientology was officially born. This represented complete evolution from Dianetics. Where Dianetics was focused on mental health and achieving a clear mind, Scientology promised spiritual enlightenment across multiple lifetimes. The Crowley influence became even more obvious here. Scientology's Thetan levels are essentially Crowley's grades of magical attainment, repackaged with space-age terminology. The idea that advanced practitioners develop supernatural abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, and the ability to leave their bodies at will, comes directly from centuries-old ceremonial magic traditions. Hubbard had basically taken the promise of magical powers and dressed it up as advanced spiritual technology. But he added something Crowley never had, a business model that would make modern tech startups jealous. He created a systematic progression of courses and levels, each specifically more expensive than the last. He established a hierarchy of trained auditors who could guide others through the process while generating revenue. Most brilliantly, he made everything seem urgent and necessary. You were saving your immortal soul across countless lifetimes. The organizational structure mirrored both military hierarchies and traditional magical orders. Members advanced through clearly defined ranks, wore uniforms, followed strict protocols. The Sea Organization, Scientology's elite inner circle, literally operated from ships for years, with Hubbard himself styling himself as their commodore. It was Crowley's magical order structure meets military discipline, complete with punishment details and rehab programs for members who stepped out of line. What made it all work was Hubbard's deep understanding of human psychology, gained from both his fiction writing background and his occult training. He knew how to create compelling narratives that people desperately wanted to be a part of. Scientologists were elite spiritual beings working to save humanity from an ancient alien conspiracy spanning millions of years. That's science fiction made manifest, and it was absolutely intoxicating for people seeking meaning and purpose. The financial success was staggering. By the 1960s, Scientology was generating millions of dollars annually, all tax-free under religious protection. Hubbard had created the perfect perpetual motion machine. Members paid increasing amounts to reach higher spiritual levels, then recruited others to do the same. It was multi-level marketing meets ancient mysticism. And it worked because it tapped into the same fundamental desires for transcendence and special knowledge. By the 1970s and 80s, Hubbard was living like a fugitive millionaire, hiding from federal investigators while his organization grew increasingly militant and paranoid. The FBI raided Scientology offices in 1977, uncovering a massive intelligence operation called Operation Snow White that had systematically infiltrated multiple government agencies to steal documents and harass critics. Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue, went to prison for her role in these operations. The man who had promised spiritual freedom through ancient wisdom and advanced technology had created an organization that seemed more focused on control, surveillance, and attacking perceived enemies than on delivering enlightenment to its members. Hubbard spent the final years of his life hiding on a ranch in California, reportedly attempting to break free from his own physical body through the most advanced Scientology techniques. When he died in 1986, the church announced that he had deliberately discarded his body to continue his spiritual research on higher planes of existence. Even in his death, the master storyteller managed to control the narrative. The legacy is complex and enduring. Scientology continues operating worldwide, still using the basic framework Hubbard developed by combining Crowley's occult teachings with his own science fiction sensibilities and business acumen. The organization claims hundreds of thousands of members globally, owns billions of dollars in real estate, and maintains its controversial tax-exempt religious status in the U.S. What makes the Hubbard story so compelling is how it reveals the thin boundaries between religion, psychology, science fiction, and performative art. He took genuine human desires for meaning, transcendence, and enhanced capability and wrapped them in the language of both science and spirituality to create something that you couldn't easily put into a box. Whether you see Scientology as a legitimate religion, a dangerous cult, or an elaborate long-term confidence game probably depends on your perspective and experience. But there's no denying the particular kind of genius required to take esoteric magical teachings, combine them with pulp science fiction concepts, and create something that would outlive its creator by decades while generating billions in revenue. The real mystery is how someone could successfully bridge so many different worlds. That takes a unique combination of creativity, ambition, psychological insight, and absolute conviction that normal rules don't apply to you. Whether that makes Hubbard a visionary or a cautionary tale probably depends on where you're sitting.